Well, Downsview today on the 11th of January. Let's read the 11th chapter of the book of Proverbs. The writer says that a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless keeps his way straight, but the wicked falls by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the treacherous are taken captive by their lust. When the wicked dies, his hope will perish, and the expectation of wealth perishes too. The righteous is delivered from trouble, and the wicked walks into it instead. With his mouth the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge the righteous are delivered. Listen, verse 10. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there are shouts of gladness. We'll look at that closer today. By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is overthrown. Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered. Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in abundance of counselors there is safety. Whoever puts up security to a stranger will surely suffer harm, but he who hates striking hands in pledge is secure. A gracious woman gets honor, a violent man gets riches. A man who is kind benefits himself, but a cruel man hurts himself. The wicked earns deceptive wages, but one who sows righteousness gets a sure reward. Whoever is steadfast in righteousness will live, but he who pursues evil will die. Those of crooked heart are an abomination to the Lord, but those of blameless ways are his delight. Be assured, an evil person will not go unpunished, but the offspring of the righteous will be delivered. Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. The desire of the righteous ends only in good, the expectation of the wicked in wrath. One gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give, and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered. The people curse him who holds back grain, but a blessing is on the head of him who sells it. Whoever diligently seeks good seeks favor, but evil comes to him who searches for it. Whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf. Whoever troubles his own household will inherit the wind, and the fool will be a servant to the wise of heart. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and whoever captures souls is wise. If the righteous is repaid on earth, how much more will the wicked and the sinner? Much wisdom, much, as you can see, Solomon's nuggets of truth here, friends. Let's examine one of them a little more deeply now. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. But when the wicked perish, the city gives thanks. A bit of an odd verse to figure out in some ways, isn't it? From Proverbs 11, verse 10. How do we know sometimes which side righteousness is on? We know that when we see it in the scriptures directly. We certainly know it when we can see people living according to the way God calls them to live. But the fact is that it's not always easy, especially with the outcome of certain situations, to know, well, who's really on the side of the Lord. I'm out walking as the day is breaking here on Monday, and it's striking to me as I was listening again to one of my Civil War narrations, and they were reminding us that in 1865, as the Civil War was beginning to draw to an end, William Tecumseh Sherman, who was now leading the Union forces from Atlanta, Georgia, on the western side of the state, and he determined to make his march to the sea, as he called it, which was some 425 miles east across the Georgian countryside, and he was going to move right across to the city of Savannah to the sea. And one of the remarks that Sherman made was that war is horrible. War is atrocious. War is awful. And the more atrocious it is, the sooner it will be over. So Tecumseh Sherman took his forces, a massive, absolutely enormous army of Union forces, and took them across the countryside of this state. The state which, in his opinion, and most historians tend to agree, that apart from Virginia, was the number one enemy of the Union, at least had provided more difficulty and resistance to the Union. And so he believed that this was the spot that was to be just majorly destroyed. And what Sherman did was he marched across the portion of the state and just ravaged it. They had no supplies with them. They needed none. They just simply lived off the land. Before he even left the city of Atlanta, he ordered every man, woman, and child, white or black, and had them out of their houses, and then had the entire city set ablaze. The difficulty in that situation was to see who the problem was. Because as I explained that story to you, you're thinking, oh, what a horrible man Tecumseh Sherman was. Now understand that he was dealing with a separation of the Union that was both unlawful, unethical, and unjust. Unless, of course, you're on the side of the Confederate States of America, as they had dubbed themselves, and they believed they had every right to secede from the Union, and that they were the ones that were the victims of the Northern powerfully economic aggression. And they believed that it was people like Sherman who were the problem. But when he set Atlanta ablaze, thousands of their own citizens actually looted the city. And so it helped actually spread the carnage from one end of the city to the other. And as you're watching, you're thinking to yourself, well, who's the enemy here? Who's the righteous ones? Sherman continued his march across Georgia after this auspicious beginning in Atlanta, and did so without stopping anywhere along the way for supplies. They just simply pillaged and stole. There was an executive order that was given that neither his officers or his soldiers were to actually loot any of the civilian homes. But as one narrator says, neither he nor his generals, his assistants, those who would carry out the orders, neither of them took it very seriously. And people just had their lives destroyed along the way. One person said that part of the Union Army said, I can kill, gut, and scrape a pig without this army even breaking stride. meaning they had so many of them, they had become so good at just taking what they wanted that they just didn't even need to slow down to do it. Now, who's the righteous in this case? Part of the army of the Confederacy decided that they would try to join up with Bedford Forrest, the future founder of the Ku Klux Klan. Forrest and his cavalry were quite a bit farther west, and he said that the Confederate general would go and join up with him to try to divert Sherman's attention. And Sherman said, boy, if he'll go all the way to the Ohio River, I'll give him rations. What he meant was that he would not be deterred in his determination to see this destruction and his march to the sea. It would not be hindered no matter what was going on. Again, who are the righteous in these cases? Plenty of you have plenty of opinions about who the righteous people were this past Wednesday in Washington, D.C. It's pretty obvious to us that hundreds and hundreds of law-breaking, violent, homegrown terrorists were smashing their way into the Capitol building and threatened the lives of law enforcement officers, of legislators, of staff members. And yet, on the other hand, there were plenty of folks who were there to peacefully protest, standing by. We know that. You just simply see the stats there. There was far more people outside than were inside. Some of them were chanting on the looters. Some of them were standing by, just watching. Some of them were actually trying to talk other people down. Well, it doesn't matter, you say, if they were there, if they had any interest in President Trump continuing as his presidency. They were obviously horrible people. On the other hand, folks will say, well, why was the democratically positioned mayor of DC not more quick to call out more of the police to put down this riot? Well, you know, and I can hear our argument, can't we? Why is Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Speaker of the House, now determined to impeach President Trump for what a mob did? Why can't we just deal with what actually happened and the people that are actually doing something wrong? Because, friends, that's not how it works in our world, does it? We want groups of people to be held accountable for individual people's actions. And yet we don't want individually to be held accountable for the actions of groups of people. It's an odd twist in the way we think, isn't it? When the righteous are successful, the city rejoices, the proverb says. But when the wicked perish, the city gives thanks. How do you know who's who? Really, how do you know? Are we patient? Are we willing to think that our initial look at a situation may not be the summary picture of what actually went on? Proverbs says just a few verses earlier about being humble in our estimation, especially of our own perspective of how we see the world, how we see our relationships, how we see the reporting of what's right and what's wrong. Brothers and sisters at Downsview, my encouragement for you this morning is have and understand that you have the liberty to be patient in your assessment. And do that in particular, being patient in your assessment of your own assessments. I am so quick to make judgments, conclusions, analyses of certain situations that I don't do myself or give myself the liberty that God has given us to just patiently evaluate with the very real possibility that I may be wrong. I may not understand what kind of circumstances I'm actually dealing with. And especially when there's people around me who agree with me, it's very difficult to step back and humbly see things through the lens of the scriptures, to do so with the overwhelming wisdom of God, which is the right application of knowledge. Remember, it is always, all throughout these Proverbs, in these last 11 days, as we're in Proverbs 11 today, that it's always the fear of the Lord that is the beginning of wisdom. And the reason that Solomon peppers that all throughout this Proverbs is that we'll be quick to forget it. We'll think we've got it. We'll think we've heard that. And we'll think we've heard enough. And brothers and sisters, we must be constantly cautiously eager to reserve our quick judgments and to patiently observe what God is doing around us, especially when we're so sure that we're the righteous ones in whom other people ought to rejoice based on our actions. We must find ourselves back to the gospel, back to the recognition that God's revelation shows us that we are the worst of sinners, that were but Christ to take his hand off of our life, those people and those actions that we despise so deeply not have the potential to be us, but that's exactly who we would be apart from God's hand in our lives. Be thankful today, brothers and sisters. Let's talk again soon. Cheers.